Hi there, welcome to Nonsense Whisky. My name is Vin PF, and on today's episode we're going to be covering the Connemara Peated Original. Now this is going to be on the channel today because it was voted for on my Patreon, so I'm going to start doing polls on my Patreon page, so if you are interested in getting involved and picking what bottles I cover, then go into the description below and check out the Patreon links and see what we've got in there. And today we've actually got a little bit of a treat as well, because not only have I got the Connemara Original Peated, I also have, courtesy of my Dram Team subscription, the 12-year-old as well. So I'm going to do a bit of a contrast on those and see what the differences are, if any, and if the difference in price is worth it. But let's crack into the first one and see what kind of we got in the glass, shall we? Now, this is protected by coin number 161 and this by coin 163. So if you are interested in either of these coins or any others in the numbers range, then again, description's in the link in the description below, and you can see about how to get hold of these. Put them down there for now. Now, Connemara is an interesting subject to talk about because there's so many layers of branding involved here. So if you haven't heard of Connemara, you'd be forgiven, but it's very, very different to most Irish whiskies in that it's double distilled instead of triple distilled. Most are triple, but it's also a peated brand. Like all the Connemaras are peated within that range. Very, very, very unique for Irish whiskey. They tend to all be triple distilled and unpeated. Now, Connemara is kind of, as it says on the bottle, it's by the Kilbeggan Distilling Company, but it's not made at the Kilbeggan Distillery, which was closed down some years ago. It has been kind of reopened by Beam Suntory. They bought the distillery where this was actually made, which is the Cooley Distillery, which used to be owned by the Teeling family, who sold it to Beam Suntory in 2011, and now have set up their own distillery in Dublin called the Teeling Distillery. So, Cooley Distillery, owned by Beam Suntory. So you have Connemara, Kilbeggan Distilling Company, then you have the Cooley Distillery, and then you have Beam Suntory. So all of these are embroiled in the same thing. Kilbeggan is still a whiskey, and it is currently made at the Cooley Distillery, but I imagine they're going to start making it at the Kilbeggan Distillery as well. That's a lot of information, so if you are interested in sort of brushing up on that a little bit, then hit the Wikipedia pages because it's all pretty much there. Back to this whiskey itself. As I said, double distilled, peated, ex-bourbon barreled. It's a 40% whiskey, and because I picked this up in an airport, I get to see on the back, in German, mit Wabstoff Zuckcolor, so with added colour. Now I really, really, really like that rule in Germany that if it's added colour, it must be on the label, and I wish we did it as well. I said I picked this up in an airport. I actually picked this up in Scotland, of all places. I wandered past it in Edinburgh Airport when I went up to see Glengoyne. Link to that video up here. I think it's quite a good video, but you know, each to their own. And I picked this up in Edinburgh over all the scotches that were there because it was £20, and that is about £15 cheaper than I saw it anywhere else online at the time. It fluctuates as always. You can get it for about 30, but £20 was too good a deal to miss up on. So we'll talk about, once I've tried the whiskey, we'll talk about whether the full price is really worth it or if you want to wait for a deal. Let's get onto the nose and see what we've got, shall we? Now, it's definitely smoky, but this isn't like a really hard-hitting Islay peat. It's nice, kind of smooth, easy-going peat. It's also a little sweet, some honey notes in there as well. And interestingly, it's kind of like a heathery peat, so it's more like your kind of like Highland Park, that kind of peatiness. If you can imagine the Highland Parks, the less sherried ones, that's kind of what we're going for here. Obviously Highland Park, a lot of sherry influence in there as well. Let's try on the palate. Now for me, this is where it starts to fall off just a little bit. Mouthfeel is very thin. It's got a nice flavour to it. More of that sweetness. It is kind of peaty and spicy, but again, it's that heathery peat. It's not a kind of really dirty, earthy peat. It's not a kind of like a burnt barbecue, like a bonfire peat, and it's not a medicinal peat. It's just a nice floral, kind of grassy smokiness instead. Now the finish is kind of medium, it's not really long, kind of sour for my liking, but it's alright, and that's kind of what we have to say about this. For the £20 I paid for it, it's a complete bargain. I'd be a bit loath to pay £30–35 for it now that I've had it for £20, but that said, it's not a bad whiskey by any stretch. And if you're a big fan of Irish whiskey and you've been looking to make that transition to Scotch, or if you're a bit afraid of peated whiskies and you want something easy to ease you into that, this might be the answer for you. Let's try the 12-year-old and see what differences we've got over there, shall we? It's got a different nose for sure. For me, it's a little bit more orchardy, a bit more apples. Maybe even a slight citrusy note to it, kind of on the lemony side. Let's try on the palate. Now, it's definitely not as kind of thin on the mouthfeel as the original is. The peat, for me, is kind of toned down a little bit. It's not so much peat, not so much spices, more sweetness. But you can tell it's kind of the same thing. It's not so different side by side. Now the funny thing is, on the finish, it seems to be more spice heavy than the previous one, the original. The original, I said, was quite sour, and this is it's drying for sure, but it's got that extra element of spiciness on the tongue. Now the problem with the 12-year-old, at least for me anyway, is that it's discontinued or at least sold out. And if you can get a bottle, it was RRP of around £55. So if you account for the fact that I paid a lot less for this than I should have probably, let's talk about full value. It's another £20 on from that. Again, with the price I paid for it, we're talking another 30 on from it. £80 on the secondary market, and I absolutely do not recommend it for that. I would say if you're even remotely interested in this Connemara, then you want to be hitting the basic one for a deal price. You know, unless you're absolutely desperate to try it, then by all means hit it for the full price. I'm picking what bottles I oh dear. Wrong hole.